What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the first edition of King Jing Sports Things. I am your host, King Jing. I'm sort of just going to use this space to get off some takes, whether it be about the NBA, the MLB, the NFL, WWE. It doesn't really matter. But today I actually want to talk about something that has been weighing on my mind for quite some time now, and it actually involves one of my favorite players in the NBA. We share the same namesake. His name is Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has been sort of characterized as someone who is extremely hardworking, but is a bit bombastic, pretty easy to piss off. He's very competitive, but he isn't afraid to speak his mind. And if his current team is starting to go downhill, he has no problem with talking about it and, talking about those issues that he's facing with the organization. I see a lot of discourse on the internet. I see a lot of discourse on Twitter, Reddit. A lot of NBA fans are quick to judge a situation and quick to just throw around judgments such as maybe Jimmy Butler is a nuisance to their team, or maybe he's so selfish in the way that he plays that who knows, like, I don't know. Maybe you just don't like Jimmy Butler. Maybe you don't like the way that he acts. But I'm starting to think maybe Jimmy Butler was right about every single situation that he's been in. And I sort of want to go back and look through the history and determine, what was happening with those teams at the time and whether or not he was right to leave that situation. So let's get right into it. So first, we're actually going to talk about his first stop in the NBA. Jimmy Butler was drafted in 2011 by the Bulls. He was the 30th overall pick. And, most of the time, if you are picked with one of those late round, first round picks, typically you don't do much with that franchise. You're not really being drafted to become the face of the franchise. That is more around the time where you're going to be drafting role players. And to be quite honest, Jimmy Butler didn't really have an easy path laid out for him to the NBA. He ends up breaking out a few years into his career. He was an all-star a few times, and then I believe in 2017 he actually became a part of the All-NBA team. But that wasn't enough for him. Jimmy Butler believed that the Bulls were being mismanaged. They had a sort of lack of direction, and they were continuously failing to put together a contender. At that time, it was Coach Fred Hoiberg for the Bulls, and Butler had developed into a elite two-way player, but Hoiberg and the front office were unable to construct a high-level roster that complemented those skill sets that he brought. He had a good running mate in Derrick Rose for a while, but obviously injuries sort of derailed his career. He was shipped off to the New York Knicks, and right afterwards, the Bulls brought in two aging veterans, and Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo, both who had different play styles that sort of clashed with Jimmy Butler. So there's not a lot of spacing on that team, especially considering the way the league was headed. The organization was said to have a little transparency and constant uncertainty with the two GMs that were sort of running the franchise, which was Gar Forman and John Pax. Butler was able to eventually force a trade where he was sent to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the 2017 season, which returned Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and a first-round pick, and that first-round pick ended up turning into Lauri Markkanen. While LaVine eventually developed into an all-star, the Bulls have yet to make a playoff push, while Butler immediately helped lead the Wolves to their first playoff run since Kevin Garnett. That's crazy. And now LaVine, Chris Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen aren't even on the team anymore. That kind of just shows that Butler's success with the Wolves and the Bulls, Butler's success with the Wolves and the Bulls' lack of success further emphasizes that Jimmy may have been right about the Bulls' unwillingness to put together an actual competitive roster. But it doesn't just end there. So after Butler was traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves, he was able to immediately turn the franchise around, as I mentioned before. Despite that impact, it became very clear to him that the organization was not fully committed to the level of intensity and accountability required to be a true contender. And that's something that I believe Jimmy Butler values very high. When Butler eventually arrived in Minnesota, it was assumed that they'd go forward building around him and their two young co-stars, Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. However, Butler quickly noticed a lack of urgency and work ethic from those two future cornerstones of the franchise. Specifically, he got onto Karl Anthony Towns' lack of defensive effort and the inconsistency coming from Wiggins. Butler voiced his opinion to the front office, and it did not seem like they agreed with his sentiment, which is how we ended up with the infamous practice where Butler ended up dominating the starters with the third stringers, which is absolutely insane. But, you know, that little stunt seemed crazy. But it did showcase that his belief that the team wasn't operating at the highest level was correct, you know. Unfortunately, rather than resolving those issues internally, the organization let the situation spiral, which ends up leading us to trading Jimmy Butler to the Philadelphia 76ers during the 2018-19 season. Butler's departure immediately exposed Minnesota's inability to sustain success. And after his exit, the Wolves fell back into mediocrity, and they ended up missing the playoffs for the next 4 years while Butler flourished with the 76ers. So now at this point, Jimmy Butler has been traded twice now. He's now with the 76ers, and to be quite honest, his stint with the 76ers wasn't that long. But it was still extremely impactful for the franchise. Butler immediately became the most reliable clutch performer on that team, a team filled with Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris. You know, you would have thought that would have been an extremely successful team, you know, and, you know, Butler ended up leading them to the brink of the Eastern Conference Finals. But despite that performance and impact, the 76ers decided that they needed to choose a direction on who they were going to prioritize building this team around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Both of them have already been paid. They're not going anywhere. So the question came down to whether you want to prioritize re-signing Tobias Harris or Jimmy Butler. And I do believe the Sixers ended up offering Jimmy Butler a contract, but it ended up being well below the market value. And obviously that pissed off Jimmy Butler. So with Butler's dissatisfaction with the leadership structure, and, you know, he was constantly clashing with the head coach, Brett Brown, over the offensive system, it was clear that Butler wasn't going to be returning to the team. You know, Butler ends up leaving that offseason's joining the Heat in a sign-in trade. Butler's departure ends up exposing the flaws within the Sixers organization, as Philly continuously had postseason failures. And, you know, we ended up getting a very dramatic exit of the team with Ben Simmons, where you know, he ends up sitting out for an entire season. He gets traded to the Nets, and there's just been so much uncertainty with that franchise, whether it's going to be Joel Embiid's health, the carousel of head coaching changes that took place over the next couple years. Meanwhile, Butler was able to go to Miami and, you know, had a pretty impactful stint there. And lastly, that brings us to Jimmy Butler's stint with the Miami Heat. You know, at first it seemed as though that Jimmy Butler had finally found his home for the remainder of his career. It really seemed like that the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler, they were just a match made in heaven. They were meant to be. However, the Heat seemed to have different plans. As I mentioned, Butler was able to lead this Heat team to 2 NBA Finals, one in 2020, one in 2023. They did come up short both of those times, but you would think that the organization would be committed to building a good team around him as a cornerstone. However, you do have to look at it in the Heat's eyes. This is a business. You do have to run it efficiently. And, Jimmy Butler's 35 years old. The team was reluctant to giving him money that he truly believed that he deserved. And quite frankly, he did. This ends up creating friction between the two sides, which results in the Heat sending him to Golden State, where he has won, I believe, 14 out of the last 16 games now. We're recording this on Tuesday, March 18th. So they're 14-2 with Jimmy Butler on that roster, while the Heat remains mediocre, currently sitting at the 9th seed in a very, very weak Eastern Conference. So, at this point, it may be a little bit too early to claim that Butler was right about forcing his way out of Miami. But so far, it seems like his impact has been very felt with Golden State. And I'm sure the Miami Heat is currently missing his play as well. So yeah, it seems as though every situation that Jimmy Butler forces his way out of, he ends up coming out on top at the end of the day. He leaves the Bulls. They fail to make any impact in a playoff run. He leaves the Timberwolves, and guess what? They end up trading both Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. So what was he correct about his criticisms between the two young stars? Obviously, you need to give young players in this league time to grow. But at that point, it seemed as Minnesota wanted to be competitive. I feel like Jimmy Butler was just trying to force their hand. And, they ended up letting him go. They let it all get public, and it was probably one of the most uglier scenes that we have seen as basketball enjoyers, NBA enthusiasts, if you will. He goes to the Sixers. Sixers, obviously, they have Joel Embiid. He ends up winning an MVP. They've never truly fallen off, but with the pieces that they had with that run, you would have thought that maybe they would have made at least an Eastern Conference Finals, but that hasn't been the case. And now we're here with Jimmy Butler leaving Miami, and I do think it's a little bit too soon to determine whether or not he was correct about wanting to leave that situation. But to be fair, it did seem like it was more of a money issue. I don't know if it had to do with the organization. I do know that him and Pat Riley were butting heads. There was some stuff about missing flights. Jimmy Butler came out and said that had to do with like a sick family member or something. So I'm sure more information will end up coming out over the next couple years about that situation. But right now, it does look like he is succeeding in Golden State. That he's completely turned around that team that was a very boring, definitely not a contender, and now it seems like they could be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. So I ask you, do you guys think that Jimmy Butler was right? Let me know in the comments. Appreciate you guys stopping by for my first episode here. I don't know how often I'll be putting this out. Maybe it's kind of whenever I have a take. Maybe if I have an idea that is sparked, I'll hop on here and I'll record something. But until next time, appreciate you guys. Thank you.